What is up, adventurers, and welcome to a brand new ShawnSetGO video. And today we're going to be talking about pugging. It's been a while since we've talked about pugging in general. I think it's overall the pugging experience. Most people understand it to be one thing. I think that there's a little bit more complexity to the pugging overall issue. I think that overall it's great when things can be pugged. I think that for the most part, if things can be puggable, say in M+ in lower keys, and if they can be done, say up to about a normal level 4 rating, I think that's actually reasonable. But I think that there's things along the way that make pugging a little bit unbearable. So this season has been a little bit mixed. I think that there's good cases for pugging being good this season, as opposed to reasons that maybe it's not. But let's talk about both of those issues and also kind of find out what are the solutions for something like that. And so let me quickly disclaimer this by saying that, of course, all these videos, while they are a collective of community opinions, all my videos tend to be a community discussion. What are the people saying on the forums, on the news pages, and then collecting that idea into what I think would be a good solution to those problems. I do think that for the most part that these are a good portion of the community, like, you know, maybe it could be a vocal minority, but enough to where it is significant that it should be something that's addressed as opposed to ignored. So let's jump into the video though. Enough of me yapping. This one says, this season, I decided to pug my way to 3K. Funny enough, the higher I went, the chiller and friendlier people became. Met some great folks along the way. Hope everyone gets to have the same kind of experience. This first comment says the path to heaven begins in hell. All right, yeah, that's a bit much. But I think that often this opinion is often what people have, which is the mid-range pugs are the absolute worst. So basically like those 7, 8s, but like once you get closer to the 10s, they tend to be very smooth. I would say this season, the lower keys have definitely been successful more often than previous. I would say early, like in season 1, season 2, those early keys felt worse than this season. This season, it definitely feels better. It feels like they're more successful, except for, I mean, I want to say except for overall with maybe like Arakara. I haven't had too many people with like Dawnbreaker issues or Priory issues as much as I have in previous seasons. I do think that people had more experience now than ever before, I guess, is the main thing. I mean, this is kind of an obvious thing, but I think that's maybe possibly a reason. So this one says, this season feels easier to pug and I love it. Disclaimer, I do play tank, so maybe that's why it feels like this. They skipped entirely season 2, came back season 3. I played 3 nights per week. I did the first 8 out of 8 normal and then 4 out of 8 hard 4 out of 8 heroic, and then 1 plus 10 key, and then third week 6 out of 8. So basically increasing the amount of what they did over time. Everything with the pug without a guild, and they wanted to share how this patch feels easier to pug. So season 1 pug was very bad. Season 2 was good. I did 2.3k on my red paladin. This season I'm playing Restless Shaman, and it feels good. Pugging feels good 4 out of 5 times. So I think it's overall a sentiment that it has improved. I think it's because the dungeon pool once again has repeated to a pretty large degree, but still I think that the dungeons actually feel reasonable, and the changes to dungeons we've done before don't feel so painstaking. It doesn't feel like they try to make them to where they were undoable. They were just maybe a few points where they've gone, let's make this something you can trip up on for higher keys that can be punishing. So it definitely has moments like that, but I'd say overall it's pretty reasonable. Now, let's talk about maybe the not so great parts about why pugging may not be doing as well as people want. But let's talk about rating first. So this one says average Fractilis pug experience. So in this one, the first person says, I thought it was like Tetris, random block last night in LFR. To be honest, yeah, I mean, that's what people called it, I think, to begin with. Legit made a group of 3 a.m. and 2-shot it, lots of pings, but no weak aura, no nothing. Great boss, very fun, very easy if you just pan your camera. Any boss that requires a bit of brain usage and teamwork is usually hard to pug. Did it on heroic today with only 1 wipe after spending almost 2 hours there last night just wiping. The difference was the same pug leader, but today only accepted people with 2.5k rating and 700 item level. Too many slackers wanting to get boosted as usual. And I want to say that this has developed, I think, another sort of consequence with the pugging issue, in that because you do have a number of players pugging up to 2.5k or pugging up to 2k and then maybe beyond, I think that there are a number of players who get into rating and have pushed the idea that heroic is now the standard as opposed to normal, because normal, in my opinion, doesn't give quite enough rewards and isn't challenging enough for people to actually face mechanics. So I think there's a number of issues to where I think hugging up until heroic has caused some problems. I mean, you can disagree with me on this. That's totally fine. I don't think that hugging or heroic should be unpuggable. It's just that I feel like right now the standards for like high is moving down. And so what ends up happening, and I think this comes up in a later post that I saw, but I think what ends up happening is by the time you get to week 3, if you're not already, say 2 out of 8, 4 out of 8, 6 out of 8 on heroic, you are behind. And that could be for a number of reasons, right? It could be that you were doing other things. Maybe you weren't playing as intensely, and you're thinking like, well, why does that bother you? Just do the other ones. Well, a majority of these groups require that you have the rating. So in order to get the rating, though, you have to work through the lower keys. You can't do the lower keys because now everyone's on the higher keys. Same issue and I'm projecting a bit here. This is happening to me currently. So heroic, you have to have 8 or 6 out of 8 in order to get into a key that's going to get you to 8 out of 8. But in order to get a 6 out of 8, they want you to have a 4 out of 8. So you have to have previously done a heroic up into a certain point in order to get to that point usually. And it's like, well, so I need to exist last week. So it's like, okay, I'll do a 4 out of 8. But now it keeps on moving forward to where everyone's ahead. So now it's like you have to have 7 out of 8 until you can get your 8 out of 8. And it puts it to where it's like, all right, this seems kind of like ridiculous to where I have to get lucky enough to where I get in a pug that gets me a little bit further than I expect. Or if you're behind, then you're perpetually behind until you put in or get lucky. And so that's what I'm noticing overall with the pug experience being a little bit more accessible in the higher key ranges, is that while there's a lot more people doing it, I think for the people who do fall behind, say a week or two, because for me specifically, I'll talk about me specifically. I, for the first week, was doing like all I really did was a few keys, like low level keys, so I would be able to do 8 out of 8 normal. Did 8 out of 8 normal my first week. So that was very doable, very reasonable. Within my second week, however, I noticed that people were requesting that players have 2 out of 8 heroic. And I was like, well, dang, I can't do that. I couldn't pug for it in my second week. And then the rest of my second week, I was covering midnight content and doing videos on midnight and focusing on that. And so it's like, it took me so many hours out of my day already. I was like, well, I can't do any heroic this week. And I did a few more Mythic Plus. You know, I got up to like 3 to 5 range Mythic Plus. Wasn't able to do like a key push that week, unfortunately. So now coming into this week, it's been like, well, in order to do heroic, I needed to have more experience in heroic in order to do higher Mythic Plus now, even though I have almost 700 eye level, because I know what gear items to push. I know where I can get my hero pieces. I know where I can get my easy upgrades. I know where, if I get my best in slot, I can go, okay, let me invest some time. Let me do some recrafts. Let me do some things to make my character better. I know how to do that. I know how to get the eye level. But for most people, having those clears in advance, basically having the 5 key before you do the 6 key, but you can't just jump to an 8 key because people want you to have experience in the key just below it or have an overall rating. And so if you don't have either of those, but you have the eye level and you have the experience, you sit in this sort of dead zone area is what I'm noticing. And so I think that dead zone area is probably like the natural consequence to pugging being more accessible to a wider range of players. Now, as far as solutions, I honestly think that I think there should be a standardized setting by Blizzard of like what you can request in a pug as far as the posting. Like if you're going to request that people have like they're doing heroic, you can only request up until a certain boss that's reasonably acceptable for players. Same thing with Mythic Plus. If you're going to request that people are doing 9s, that you make it like more, or that people have 9s before you get to clears of a certain level, then it has to be, I don't know, it has to be like within 2 to 3 of a range. But just standardizing it, I think would be a good idea for creating the postings. That way, you're always getting people within that range. Like they have to, that way they can see that, as opposed to just allowing the add-ons to dictate those things. But I don't think that's much different from what already is being done. I think most people just do that. I just think standardizing would make it more reasonable to where it's like, maybe there will be more opportunities or more groups that are created just to get people to those, like, I would say if there's push keys, there's a reach key, you know, or there's a reach rating level where you can go, okay, I can get 2 out of 8, and next time I'll be able to get in a group guaranteed. That's a 4 out of 8, something along those lines, to where it's a little bit more, I guess, laid out, because that's what I've noticed more often. But I don't know if that's a good solution for the long term. It's just an idea. Don't attack me. But if we're going to talk about my biggest negative that I think has been affecting the pug experience, I think it's going to be the abandoned system. Now, overall, I think the abandoned system came into place because I think that there is issues with people abandoning keys. I definitely do think that there are problems. This one says the abandoned system has made low pug keys worse. Typing all this as I sit in a +3 gambit pug waiting for the 18-minute timer to tick down because the tank didn't know how to do the dragon boss. Got into a pissing match with one of the DPS, is now sitting AFK. For some reason, the other members didn't accept the abandoned vote, and I can't start another vote. Deserter mark is applied if you leave repeatedly, by the way, not just for leaving once, is what people mention. And I think that's the first gimme reply, is that in the abandoned system, if you're struggling in a key and it's just a one-off, then abandoning once won't kill you. I think people are paranoid that you will get that deserter buff unfairly, but I think for the most part, if you're not doing it repeatedly, then it's not a huge deal. I think people may abandon a few though, maybe 1, maybe 2, and they're like, ooh, is this my third that's going to cause it? I think for the most part, that a little bit that vague idea is a problem. I think if you saw whenever you went to go select leave party, it said something along like a little warning box, hey, if you leave, this will be your abandon key. I think people will be less inclined to abandon, but still that doesn't fix the issue of people going AFK. I think the AFK or offline issue where people, if they do that, then you can't initiate a vote, say if you already have, that's problematic. So I think that what needs to happen here, it seems that if you have a player that's AFK, and I think it's very reasonable to see that there is an AFK, or no damage is happening within a key, they need to implement a system of like, hey, it seems like you're AFK, do you want to abandon key? Or 2, it seems like a player is offline, would you like to abandon key? And it's not a vote, it's a, this is happening, we see it's happening, you can leave now freely if you would like to. So I think that would be like on an individual basis. That to me would be a little bit of a solution to it, because I think people are going to behave a certain way if there's a problem. I think that I've never been someone to punish people if they're the problematic person in the key, but you should make the situation to where it is more beneficial to use for you to stick around versus not. But let's talk about possible solutions, even if they're a little bit funny. This one says, coming soon, Mythic Plus deserters will be paraded around Tornagal by the Arathi. And it says, shame. Mythic Plus deserters forced to PvP each other in Maldraxxus Arena to get rid of the debuff would be hilarious. I love the idea of this, where it's like, maybe this would encourage deserters though, so I'm not 100% certain, but it is quite great that I think that this would be a system. I think if you're making a system where you throw the tomatoes at the person in the stockades, I think a lot of people, I think there's streamers who have mentioned that idea long ago, where you have abandoners and you have people who mess up mechanics, get the tomatoes thrown at them. I do understand a system where it's like you publicly shame them into behaving, but I don't think the system works. I think overall, even though it's funny, I think that most people aren't going to change because of that, unfortunately. Just ran a priory, and having people AFK soft inting because their abandoned vote fails feels worse than if they just left. Soft inting, by the way, is like the idea of feeding, that you basically play actively worse so you can make the key just be unsalvageable. Ran a 13 priory, got priory partway through the cathedral and had to wipe with plenty of time left. Pally decides he doesn't want to play anymore and votes to abandon without saying a word. Everyone else wants to continue. It took me a while to notice, but he was just walking around auto attacking, not using any abilities. Feels a lot worse than just having someone straight up leave instead of holding the group hostage until they get their way with the abandon vote. I really want to stress that this is the moment where Blizzard sees this system and they may bail out because of a system, because of this. I do think that holding a group hostage is somewhat worse, especially when it happens, as opposed to someone just taking the hit and taking the deserter buff. I do understand that, where the vote doesn't go your way, and that's what happens. But possibly, I also think that because pugging has changed so greatly and just getting into groups happens somewhat quickly, I do think that there's a bit of haphazardness to forming groups. I think that the big solution that Blizzard could fix is that group comps as well as, you know, I mean, to a degree, it's like simming. If you have played the game enough, you know how to sim the success rate of a group just by your knowledge, but not everybody has that. So I think that for most people, forming those groups based off of based off of their own knowledge can be sort of limited, because you can maybe look up what's the best comp to play right now, and you might be playing the meta, and so you don't really have to worry about it. But if you're not playing meta specs, or if you're not particularly in the like ahead of the curve range, you might not have an idea of what would be a good comp for you. So for the most part, what I do when I'm making groups is I use like an AI to determine what are some of the best group players to pull for this particular dungeon, what would suit me best based on my class. And I just I'll form it based off of that for the most part, like what benefits me the most in this situation. And that's how I'll form my groups. But I think there's no reason why Blizzard can't implement a system to where if you're making a group, it's like a group helper builder. You know, it can pull people and like, hey, this person is applying for this type of stuff. It's sort of like a reverse, I guess, grouping. It pulls people from the pool of available players and goes, do you want to try to invite this player? And to me, that would be reasonable. Or if you think that, well, I don't want to get pulled in a bad group, that's reasonable. Or you can make it a system to where if players have applied, you could have sort of a match rate of this fits your group well. Or this could work with your group well based off of their eye level, their class, or their spec, whatnot, kind of like a simmed rate of like how well it does. And then have like a system of this is what they like. Of course, you can see the rating through Raider.io, but just basically a system to where people can form groups better, so they're a little bit more reasonable. I think there's no way to actively make Mythic Plus rating equal knowledge. I think for the most part, people understand it to be like in the 10 rating where that happens, but I don't think there's any defined way. But I want you to let me know in the comments, what do you think is the way to have people display in a way reasonably other than eye level and then Mythic rating that helps people to understand what's your knowledge base and what do you have going for you. The only other way I can think of doing it is just having a training grounds for each Mythic Plus, so you could practice run all this kind of stuff. Same thing with rating, where it's just like, this is how you practice run it, and just give me that story mode, but like let me learn the mechanics on my own free time within the game is the only other way I can think of doing something like that. And I don't know if Blizzard wants to or cares to. So this new abandonment system sucks. I'm pushing with a group and we made mess up the first pool. We want to abandon the key and all agree. We sit around for like 5 minutes and we get the lever tag, or we get the lever tag. So for those of you who don't know, those first 5 minutes are basically a no abandoner or no voting allowed. You have to at least do those first 5 minutes. I think that it's kind of silly, for me, well, if everyone's in agreement, 5 minutes is not that big a deal. But I also agree that there's a lot of people who quit within those first 5 minutes. I think Arakara is a perfect example, where the first boss can often kill groups. I think it's granted in a semi-successful group, that last boss can kill groups for sure, because definitely it'll kill your time. But I think that for the most part, it's that first boss, and people struggle a lot once they've done that boss poorly one time to continue forth. I think that there's tons of things that you could do to make it to where, like, hey, if you push past this boss this attempt, we'll refund this much of like a Mythic Plus. Like to me there's got to be systems of like a catch-up system, you know, like a, hey, this went poorly, let's do this. Like you wiped the first few minutes and then you make it to where, all right, if you clear it, next attempt, you'll get this much time back. Not to where you didn't lose time overall, because I think if you make it to where you get all the time back, then people will just abuse it to be like, well, now we just forcibly wipe and then we kill it super easy. Something like that. Like I don't want to make a system like that where you eventually get more time back than you lost, but I think you can make it to where you get some time back to where it's like, all right, we got an additional like minute now, even though we burned 3 minutes dying, walking back, trying again, etc. So I think there should be a system there overall to make those things work. But overall, I mean, when I'm talking about what could make the system work and what needs to be fixed in the system, I think it's quite simple. You implement systems that make it to where if someone leaves, abandons, goes AFK, goes offline, that these systems still work and doesn't hold players hostage. And then simultaneously to prevent systems like this having to be utilized all the time, like forcibly adding a debuff to players, then you can simply have a system that makes it to where, hey, leaving in those first 5 minutes of a key, which is more often than not when it happens, let's make it to where if you get past this happens. And it's actually Now the key is somewhat salvageable because you recovered and you did it this way. And you could simply, you can track that or map that by how many successful keys, or how many unsuccessful keys rather, are being quit at the first boss, at the second boss, at the dragon boss at Eco Dome. And you go, okay, this is the key where that system is implemented. That to me makes it work. If you think or disagree, let me know in the comments. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe to the page while you're at it. And of course, as per always, catch you in the next one. Peace.